G'day folks, my name's Oliver Samuel Jessope from the North Queensland Freedom Network, and we've got Mark behind the camera, and I'm here with Deborah once again. And we're going to be having a chat about a few really interesting things, but before we get into it, remember to like, subscribe, share our videos, and if you can, give us a donation to help support an independent media, because what we're doing is helping the people know what's going on in their communities so that we can all be informed and make proper decisions and make sure everyone is heard. Last time we had a chat, we spoke about the Cholumban wind farm, and we learned all about the importance of frogs in our Australian ecosystems. And yeah, do you have anything that you want to add or update us on since that
I think
meeting?
the easier subject perhaps is to start with the wind farm issue. So when we had that chat about the wind farms, that was before the election, and trying to convince the LNP government that the wind farms that they've proposed for far north Queensland are simply in the wrong place. They don't belong where they want to put them in. But now we've had the election, and Albanese is now the PM, allegedly. And I think he's going to be even more of a proponent for forcing wind farms into the system. And I'm not sure if he can be convinced that just because it's a wind farm doesn't mean you put it anywhere you damn well please. So that's going to be an interesting issue to try to convince the Labor government that, sorry, some wind farms just don't go where you want to put them. They have to go in the right place, or else don't put them in at all. And I think a sidestep to that is that, a lot of these environment groups that are sort of, I don't know what you would categorize them as, but they're like representative bodies for a whole state or a whole environment community. They're pushing wind farms, but they're not even having a discussion about right place, wrong place, or right design, wrong design. The propeller design, it just kills too many wildlife, and it doesn't belong in any wind farm in Australia. But these groups don't seem to be having that conversation. There are people like Rainforest Reserves that have to go back to them to say, hey, hang on, you're pushing something without putting qualifiers on it. Just because it's a wind farm doesn't mean that you put it anywhere you like.
It seems that most people who would support the current government support them because they would be supportive of the environment and want to help the environment. So how come you think that Albanese might not be interested in having a chat with these environmental groups about the impacts of this wind farm?
I think the difficulty is if the groups go to him to say, oh, fantastic, you're in favor of wind farms, we're in favor of wind farms, the appropriateness doesn't even come into the discussion. So I think that's a real problem. You basically are creating a split in the environment movement, where you've got part of the movement saying wind farms at any cost, and you've got another part saying, well, hang on, we have to do this smart if we're going to do this at all. So then you start getting a division in the environment movement, and politicians just love divisions. We've already seen this on the frog front, that as soon as there's a discussion or a division about something that's good for frogs or something that's not good for frogs, the politicians have just said, oh, well, you people don't even agree, we don't have to listen to you. When you people figure out what you want, then you can come back and talk to us. But you people don't even agree on this stuff within your own movement, so don't bother me. So that division may cause problems with whether the farms get built in the right place or the wrong place, because now you've got part of the environment movement saying wind farms at any cost, and another part of the movement saying, well, hang on, you have to do it right if you're going to do it at all. It makes it difficult because you've got group working against group, where everybody should be aware of the facts, and everybody should be using those facts to push the best course of action. But I don't think that's really happening on this renewables thing, this whole brainwashing thing that, oh, we got to have all these renewables. But when you actually look at some of the reports, I saw something that was passed around that was a performance report for some of the wind farms in the southern states. What a waste of technology. The performance reports on these wind farms were pitiful. Half the time they weren't even running. I was up in Ravenshoe a couple months ago, and there's that, what they call it, Windy Hill at Ravenshoe, that has one of the oldest wind farms in the state at least. And half of the turbines were turning and the other half weren't even running. What's going on? If there's enough breeze for turbines to run, how come half of them are offline? So the performance statistics on how these wind farms are performing is really not that great. They're spending all this money, they're destroying environment to put in these things, they're killing wildlife because of this propeller design that they don't question. And then when they get the things up and running, they're not even running at a decent capacity. They're like less than 20% output. Why spending all that money on a renewable technology that has that bad a performance? And then even if they get that lousy 20%, it's not even enough to power some of the needs that you can't run manufacturing on wind power. It's just not, I don't know what the right word is, but whether it's not voluminous enough or it's not powerful enough or there's just not enough volume. There's a lot of needs of what electricity is used for that we will not get out of wind farms because they're just not strong enough. So there's so many problems with the whole technology, the way it works, its poor performance, the fact that these propellers don't even last that long, and there's nothing that can be done to recycle them. They just go into landfill. So now we're going to have all these propellers, giant things sitting in landfill around the place. People who actually have homes or use electricity, buy electricity, those are the people who are actually getting billed for the costs of putting in this technology, and they're not going to get very much out of it. So the whole thing has been very questionable, and yet the environment groups are just pushing it without even looking at the facts or the downsides or what happens with a technology that doesn't even last that long. You have to keep recycling these turbines and these propellers. So you get these political knee-jerk reactions, which Albo will probably end up doing, where, oh yes, we're catering to the environment groups, we're giving them all these renewables, we're going with the technology, and they're just causing more problems. So it's a difficult area. Obviously, people want to cut down on fossil fuels, that they're very polluting. But when you look at, are wind farms really going to replace the volume of electricity that we get out of fossil fuels? They're not. And at the end of the day, where's the output? The one that really gets me is the electric cars. Oh, we're all supposed to switch to electric cars, which run off fossil fuels. So it's like, what is the difference? How many millions of cars do we have in this country that are all going to be dumped in landfill because now you got to go out and buy an electric vehicle? They're just not thinking these things through. There's problems that are created with changing over a technology like that, and they're not even looking at the problems that are going to be created. That's my personal opinion anyway. So I'm sure a lot of people disagree with that. But
that's all right. That's what we're all about, showing the full spectrum of perspective on these particular matters.
Yeah.
So thank you. You mentioned that there's a bit of a divide within the environmental movement, and then that can be taken advantage of by different kinds of energy companies. I'm wondering,
or politicians.
Or politicians,
yeah, they
right?
love it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering who needs to be having the conversation about energy, and who needs to be having this sit down talk. Does it need to be coming from? Do people need to be having this conversation within the movement, or have they had it? Or what are people in these industries talking about what to do about all this? Because
Yes.
I'd imagine they'd have a pretty good plan about ready for them to enact upon, because they're the ones with all the money putting these projects out there. But it seems to be there's quite a lot of confusion amongst people. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I think certainly the different groups in the environment movement really need to understand this technology a lot better, as to who's going to enlighten them. Like Carolyn at Rainforest Reserves, I mean, she has tried contacting some of these groups just to say, look, you hang on, before you push this, you really need to understand what's going on and where they want to put it. So she's been trying to lobby some of these people, but it would be great if there were experts in the field, people that have actually worked in wind farms and can actually talk about the downside, who could educate the environment movement. Because it's the movement itself. I mean, you look at the campaigns and the way that they target their members or the general public, and they're influencing the public behavior, and go and tell your politicians that we got to do this and we got to do that. Whatever it is they're asking the government for, it's got to be realistic. And it really shouldn't be creating more problems than what it's solving. But these groups need to be educated, and I'm not sure who's going to educate them. I mean, Carolyn doesn't see that this is totally her responsibility. She feels that other people should also be lobbying these groups and saying, well, look, hang on. You really need to understand what you're pushing before just blindly telling people, we got to have renewables, and tell your politicians we got to have renewables. So we're going to spend all this money to put up this particular wind farm. We're going to put it in this lousy location, and it's going to damage the environment. And all we're going to get out of that is 15% of what it's capable of producing. Is it worth the cost? So a lot of that information, is industry-based information, and it needs to be circulated around to these people.
It makes me wonder, do you think that some of these environmental groups need to perhaps be talking more with these people working in the industry? Because it sounds like there might be a bit of a disconnect there. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think environment groups don't necessarily talk to the other side, whether that's the mining community or wind farm industry or anything like that. It's always a us and them sort of thing that comes into a lot of these issues. I remember when I used to be in the animal rights movement in the States, there was a very big us and them. You don't talk to them because that's the other side, and the other side always lies, and they're never going to give you any accurate information. I mean, that was what we were always told. You don't talk to the other side. So they would just make up whatever information that they had. You'd see statistics about laboratory animals that were killed each year in laboratory testing in the States. And every once in a while, somebody would just add a zero onto the end of the figure. And it's like, well, hey, who changed that figure, and where'd you get that information from? Nobody was asking any questions like that. Oh, it's 70 million. Oh, it's 70 billion. And they just not research. Nobody would ask any questions. You're told this, and they would just fly with it. And I see a bit of that in the environment movement here as well. Oh, we got to have renewables. Do you know anything about the renewables industry? I think sometimes when you're sort of telling an established group, well, you need to do this or you need to do that, they're not necessarily going to say, oh, sure, okay, you think we should do that? Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
They've got their own agendas and their own campaigns that they want to do, and their own decisions that they make. It would be great if they knew more about the industry that they want to push, but as to who's going to educate them, especially if they don't particularly want to be educated. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Yeah.
Why do you think there has been rush decisions made by the environmental movement to push renewables or any solution without fully understanding it?
I suppose the media is involved in some of that. This whole thing about climate change, that's all you hear about now. No matter what the issue is, we had flooding rains. Oh, it's climate change. We had a hot month last month. Oh, it's climate change. Everything is politically tied to climate change now. So this is what the public hears all the time. This is what the groups hear. And it's just, I guess, the way that brainwashing works. So whatever it is that somebody up there decides, whether it's the powers that be or the puppets that they put in place to run the government, they sort of have these agendas of where they want to direct society to go to. And we've seen so much of that in the last 2 years. They had an agenda in mind as to what they were going to do about handling this pandemic stuff. And I think the climate change is really part of it. It's part of this whole money wealth transfer thing that they want to do, increasing taxes on stuff. I mean, Australia's already had its carbon tax. These are agendas that somebody's got in mind, and they just saturate it all through the media. And unless you're a sort of person that sort of kind of says, well, okay, they said this and I want to know more about it. Not everybody has the time or the inclination to do their own research. So they just take what they hear, and they hear climate change all the time now from every direction. It is being drummed into everybody. And there are people that dissent against that. There's the community out there, there's scientists out there that say, no, we are going into a cooling period. And here's the evidence to say we're going into a cooling period. But those people, as soon as they try to publicize that information, they get harassed, they get shut down, they get censored. you're a climate denier. There's a lot of, I mean, the psychological manipulation that is going on is phenomenal. And I guess if you tie it back to a spiritual side of things, we are in an information war. And even a lot of the truthers and the New Age community or whatever, a lot of the people there are also lying about things. So now everything is up to personal discernment, trying to figure out, even if you're listening to a truther or an alt news channel or any of that, all information at this point in time needs to be looked at twice and just, does it resonate? Does that sound like the truth, or is somebody manipulating something? A lot of, I think, the stuff that's going on is really to facilitate more wealth transfer. That was a huge thing during the 2 years of the pandemic. The amount of wealth that was transferred to Big Pharma and some of these other, Gates and Soros and all those scumbags. It's all about money. It's all about getting as much money out of people as possible. People are so easily brainwashed these days because the whole aspect of critical thinking is not really part of how we're educated anymore. We're not educated to ask questions about everything. Don't believe everything you hear. Ask questions about it. Can you verify that what somebody's told you? My generation does it, but my generation and people who are older than myself, you look at what's happened to them in the last 2 years. It's almost as if people are deliberately trying to get rid of the older people, because the older people know how to critically think, and they've got that background and experience and knowledge that they've gained over their however many decades they've been here. And you look at the education system that kids go through now, and they're being dumbed down. They're being taught not to critically think about things and just listen to what you're told.
Before we wrap up, is there anything you want to say to reiterate the importance of frogs and why it is the most important thing perhaps for us to make sure our environment is looked after?
Well, certainly frogs are very important to the environment. There's so many other animals out there that depend on frogs as a food source. I mean, that's not great for the frogs that, they are eaten by so many other animals, but that is part of nature, and they are important for that reason. But I think the frogs are actually trying to tell us a lot about what is going wrong with the environment. But if you're not paying any attention because, I don't like frogs, there's a lot of people that don't like them and don't pay much attention to them. They're not warm and fuzzy, and you can't pick them up and cuddle them, or they're just not as appealing to the public as many of the other interesting wildlife we have in this country. But they are important, and the sort of stuff that our group has been documenting about what is wrong with them is quite serious stuff. I mean, the fact that Australian frogs now get cancer at the rate that they do is I think, really serious stuff. And we're trying to influence academia and the government about doing something about this cancer investigation. But at the same time, our own group, current circumstances with the economy and stuff are definitely hurting our group big time. And the fact that volunteerism is collapsing in Australia is definitely hurting us very badly. So we're trying to continue to do what we can, but we don't have the resources anymore. So it's getting harder and harder to actually keep the sort of level of work going that we have, because we just don't have the money coming in the door, and we don't have the volunteers to help with the work. So, and other people are telling us the same thing. So it's not just us, it's a lot of other nonprofit groups are suffering as well.
Yeah, well, hopefully people will watch this video and reach out to the Frog Safe crew, and we'll get something happening about all this. Cool.
Would be nice.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Deborah.
No worries. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, awesome. That's all we've got for today, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side.